Tonight's guest is Jo Bartosch. Jo's a writer, journalist, and campaigner for the rights of women and girls, whose work has been published in many publications, including The Critic, where she's assistant editor, Unherd, The Telegraph and The Times. This evening, she's going to talk to us about Pornocracy, the book which she co-authored with Robert Jessel. Current Green Party policy regarding pornography can be found in the prostitution and the sex industry section of the rights and responsibilities section of the policy archive. It's too long for us to quote in full here, but we have put a link on our website and it can be found in the post about tonight's webinar. So thank you, Jo. First of all, what brought you and Robert together to write Pornocracy?
So, we've known each other for a while online, and Rob's interest. So he was one of the founders of Fair Cop, and my interest is obviously sort of steeped in radical feminist theory, and I wanted to write this book because it's sort of the changes that have been brought about by pornography are just so profound and so significant, and they impact not only the way we think about ourselves, but the way we relate to one another. And I think they're even changing our laws. And I kind of wanted somebody who came at things from a different point of view to sort of bounce ideas off and to sense check. And there were things, for example, that I'd never considered, which I'm sure we'll get onto, like for example, addiction. It never occurred to me that pornography was in any serious way addictive. So Rob was able to bring that side of things. And I think also, we've been, as feminists, we've been sort of fighting pornography for decades, for longer than I've been alive, and we haven't made any bloody difference. We haven't we haven't turned the tide around. It's got worse and worse and worse. So it kind of occurred to me that there's no point just speaking to the same audience. And if I were to sort of try and write with a man, maybe that might sort of increase the readership and indeed, challenge my own ideas a bit.
And I mean, the book has certainly been so successful. It's been so widely read, so widely discussed. And you talked a bit about how pornography has changed. So how would you say it's changed from the time in which many of us grew up, when pornography meant magazines on the top shelf of newsagent shops or videos which were brought in seedy shops and passed around among mates? How's it changed in terms of accessibility or content now?
Well, I think the key thing is now you don't need to look for pornography, it will find you. So if you're a child online, the chances are you will have seen it, certainly by the age of 13, and some estimates suggest around about 11 is the first age of exposure. So it's almost impossible to avoid. Part of that is because social media platforms essentially allow it, encourage it in some respects. So, for example, when it comes to OnlyFans, which has obviously been sort of a huge phenomenon over the past 5 years, that's user-generated content, because they're all effectively self-employed, they have to push their work constantly. So you see them, and they're actually not self-employed. A lot of them have got pimps, but whatever, that's a side issue. So you see this sort of flooding of content across mainstream media. There are also more and more ways for people who are interested, mainly men, in particular sorts of pornography, to find one another. There's been a huge rise in use of spy cams, of non-consensual pornography. I mean, I would argue that consent's a tricky one anyway. So, just earlier this week, I was talking to a woman whose ex-husband had been filming her for 8 years of their 9-year marriage through covert devices, even in like shampoo bottles. I mean, it has become, and there's a huge market for it. And I think what's not understood and what's really different about pornography now compared to how it was, say, sort of 30 years ago or even 20 years ago, is that it used to be a static medium. So it used to be something you looked at. But, the dirty stack of magazines under your bed or whatever couldn't look back at you. And now there's an army of technologists keeping you clicking, finding out what your interests are, warping, changing your interests, changing your desires to keep people online because it's part of the attention economy. So I think what really isn't understood is firstly the extremity and the depravity of modern pornography. And also the fact that there is a push towards content that is more shocking, that will keep people online, men online. And I think that is the primary difference. It isn't a static medium. It learns from you and it molds interests in a very it basically is biohacking. It hacks your biology. It hacks what makes you interested. So people are increasingly becoming addicted to what they're seeing on screen. And when it comes to men, for example, we know that around about some estimates say 30% of pornography users can't get erections with their partners. And what's really interesting is that they can when they're looking at content online. So, in the context of supposedly a population crisis, this is really significant. This has a profound ramifications. And yet, because it involves sex, or people think it involves sex, I would argue it's not actually sex, there's a real reluctance to talk about it.
That's all pretty scary, isn't it? And just before we carry on with our conversation, I know that a lot of people observing the meeting today are going to have questions for you. If anyone in the webinar has got a question they'd like to ask Jo, can I ask if you pop it in the chat to Claire? She's Claire Long-Summers, got GPW after her name. And then when we finish talking, she's going to look through and ask Jo some of your questions if they haven't already been answered. Some readers might be surprised by the amount of science in pornography. Especially around the brain and addiction. How does porn change our brains?
So essentially, as I said earlier, about it being something that hacks our biology, it's effectively a super stimulus. So what that means is it's something that you don't get in nature, that is more appealing than the real thing, if you like. So the word comes from, there was a biologist called Nicholas Timberg, and he did experiments with bird eggs. Basically, if you put a big, brightly coloured egg in a bird's nest, it'll be more likely to try and incubate that than it will its own eggs. So effectively, it's a way of encouraging people to pass up on a real thing and to sort of become addicted to this product that sort of reinforces it reinforces pathways within the brain that wouldn't normally be reinforced in that way. So it's a very powerful teacher. So the messages it sort of conveys about the sexes and about what sex is are learned at a very sort of, at a base level, if you like. So over time, users tend to become desensitized. And there was a study, it was Lad Bible, so not exactly feminist, who did a study of university students, and they found, predictably enough, around about a third acknowledged that their tastes had changed, had become more extreme over time, and that's exactly what you would expect. So yes, you end up with quite often people being aroused by things that once would have disgusted them, that once would have disturbed them. And that's in part because it's a novelty-seeking function, if you like. It's something that sort of really taps into boredom, and that's why it's so dangerous, and that's why it's so all-consuming for so many users.
Right, my next question is very long, so bear with me. Personal freedom is really important to me, and I believe it is to all members of the Green Party. It's kind of one of our core values. Part of our current policy says the Green Party believes that the law should not seek to regulate consensual sexual activities between adults where those do not affect others. Where there are such effects, a balance must be reached. Adults should be free to do as they wish with their own bodies and to practice whatever form of sexual activity they wish by themselves or with each other by mutual consent. This includes the freedom not only to engage in such sexual acts, but also to be photographed or filmed doing so, to make such images available to other adults with their consent, and to be able to view such images. So that's our current policy. Having investigated why performers, for the want of a better word, enter the pornography industry, and I'm thinking in particular of the women who are filmed, and bearing in mind what happens to those women on the film set, do you think there's any such thing as truly consensual pornography?
No, I mean, I think the idea of consent itself, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, is flimsy, because we know that, for example, a majority of those who go into the standard pornography industry, so I'm not even talking about OnlyFans, around about 89-90% of those will have been abused as children. It is essentially, when people watch porn, what they are watching is women replaying the trauma that they went through when they were children, for the most part. It is grotesque. And I think that really affects the ability to consent. And I think the way that that policy is worded, clearly, the idea is that pornography is something private, when it isn't. We know that it changes attitudes. We know that it entrenches sexism. We know that it is a dangerous social force. It is not a personal choice. And I think it's very easy, particularly for sort of libertarian men, to turn around and sort of talk about choice, because of course our entire idea of liberalism is built around the individual powerful man, and that just does not hold when it comes to women in the same way. It's like, if you're in financial straits, have you consented? If you've been abused as a child, have you consented? Well, technically you can say the word yes, but I think it's probably more appropriate to ask why men think it's okay to, for example, stick their dicks in Bonnie Blue or whatever it happens to be. I think that's actually where we need to be asking, why do you think this is acceptable? So yeah, and when it comes to, for example, some of the women who I spoke with, there was one young woman called, well, she went by the name Mila, and she got into the sex industry, into prostitution, and into performing OnlyFans as well a bit. And that was essentially, not actually, interestingly, not because she'd been abused as a child, but because she saw pornography when she was 12. So from that, she ended up becoming addicted to pornography. She sort of ingested really harmful ideas about what sex was. She thought it wasn't something that was supposed to be enjoyed or was supposed to be mutual or was supposed to be fun. She thought it was something that was done to young women. She thought it was something that should hurt, that should be humiliating, that should be painful. So in a way, her decision to go into the sex industry was a free choice. And then, funnily enough, it ended up absolutely destroying her, and she ended up with addiction problems, and thankfully she's now out. But that is a very familiar story as well, and I think that's not really accounted for or understood. This doesn't exist in a vacuum. This is something that, we're having kids effectively traumatized by porn, going into porn, and then in order to keep the clicks coming in, because performing in pornography can be addictive as well in its own way, because you become kind of addicted to the attention and obviously the money, and then you eventually need the drugs and all the rest of it to keep doing it. So when it comes to extremity, I mean, if you look at any of these sort of who are now household names like Lily Phillips or Bonnie Blue, invariably they started off doing quite mild things, and then it became more and more extreme because they needed to keep their fan base happy. And that's again something that isn't really considered. So, does Bonnie Blue say she consents? Of course she does. Of course she says she's consenting. Does that mean it's okay? No, absolutely not, because it's not only about what happens to her, it's about the message that her actions send out to the rest of society.
I think you're right. When we hear the stories of these individual women, they are absolutely heartbreaking, aren't they? Sorry, Claire, you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, we've had a question in the chat.
We can have some questions at the end.
At the end, yeah.
Is it okay if we we've got a few more things to talk about first?
Yeah.
But there will definitely be time for questions. As a parent, the section of the book that I found most upsetting were those about the effects pornography is having on girls and young women. For example, the messages that Holly Bourne received when she took a job at a charity, providing sex and relationships advice to young people, or the questions that Yes Matters founder Gemma Aitchison is asked when she goes into schools to teach about domestic abuse and sex stereotypes and healthy relationships. Could you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know where you want me to start, but
I think, well, just for anybody who's not read the book, I mean, what kind of experiences are these girls having?
So obviously the idea of what normal sex is has been totally warped because the boys that they will be having their first intimate relationships with will have seen strangulation porn before they've even held a girl's hand or kissed a girl. So, you know, it's the expectations of what sex is have been totally warped and changed. I think there is now also a sort of seamless progression, if you like, between sort of competing for attention, for clicks on sites like Instagram, and then going on to OnlyFans. It's sort of pretty much a conveyor belt. It's very easy to get drawn into because they're sort of set up in a similar way. And when you look at the content that, for example, is removed by the Internet Watch Foundation, so around about 92% of child sexual abuse material is self-generated now. So this is kids filming themselves and putting it out there. And 99% are girls. So it has become almost totally normal for girls to make images of themselves, to share them. And there's no, you know, you'd expect schools to turn around and say, you know, don't share your photos, you know, don't film yourself. This isn't what sex is. And they're not. Because teachers are too scared to talk about it, understandably, and who would listen to them anyway. And frankly, a lot of the sex education providers who are going into schools, I think, are a safeguarding risk. I think they need to be considered with a very healthy side eye. So they're not being told that that there's anything dangerous or wrong about porn, because the overarching sort of philosophy, if you like, is don't be judgmental.
Yeah. As the mum of a daughter and as a member of Green Party Women, my primary concern is how women and girls are affected by living in a pornified society. But you and Robert do also look at the effect on boys and men as users of porn, as young people trying to learn about sex and going to porn to learn about sex, as boys and young men navigating their first relationships. What would you say are the negative impacts of porn for boys and men?
Yeah, I mean, before I started writing the book, I didn't have a lot of sympathy, to be honest. I just thought, well, you know, don't do it, boys. Now I can see that actually they are up against the most sophisticated technologists out there, sort of trying to hook them in. Also, I think I understand that they're going to feel anxious about sex. They're going to feel self-conscious, and pornography is never going to laugh at them. It's never going to, you know, make them feel insecure about their bodies. It's never going to turn them down, particularly not when they then sort of go on to form sort of pseudo relationships, parasocial relationships with OnlyFans performers. Quite often, it's their managers who will be sending the messages and the photos, but they don't know that, obviously. And now there is a drive towards AI porn and AI companions. So Elon Musk in particular has been pushing these AI companions like Annie. So Annie is like essentially a sort of anime style French maid. And she is entirely receptive to what men and boys, what the user wants. So we're having sort of these, they're not forming proper relationships. They're forming like solipsistic relationships. And I mean, I think that's probably something that boys are more inclined to anyway, to perhaps not. I think it's just, you know, the way we construct masculinity, they're not encouraged to think about the impact of their behavior on other people. And I think that there is some evidence to suggest that that is now the girls and women are now paying the price for that, because they are, you know, having relationships with men who just do not care about their feelings, who think that strangulation is okay. And of course, the way we construct femininity is that, you know, a feminine, a sexy girl puts up with it. So that's, you know, she doesn't say no. So I think those two things are very much coming into conflict. I also think there's a political element to this too, which is, as I'm sure you're aware, in Green Party Women, young women are lurching towards a version of the left. I wouldn't call it the left. And young men are becoming increasingly interested in parties towards what you might want to call sort of the right. And we are seeing a sort of total divergence of views and in expectations about what healthy relationships look like. So, you know, you've got sort of boys who are taught to become very entitled, to expect a sort of trad wife. And then you've got girls who, frankly, are understandably very suspicious of boys and men, because the boys and men they will have come across will have been exposed to pornography, which will have shaped their values. So we're seeing a sort of divergence of the sexes, and nobody's really talking about what might be underlying this. There are lots of factors, but I don't think you can discount the impact of pornography from that.
No, absolutely. In Pornocracy, you talk about the success of zombie feminism among younger women. What do you mean by zombie feminism? How do you think it's different from earlier waves of feminism, and what role has pornocracy played in its rise?
Oh, yeah. I mean, so I came up with that because basically I was sort of thinking about what is this sort of form of really hyper-consumerist feminism that it's very hyper-personal that has become the mainstream, and it's all about not judging. It's all about personal empowerment, personal choice, without examining the social context in which those choices are made. So, if a young woman wants to go and sell pictures of her ass on OnlyFans or whatever it happens to be, woo, go girl boss. It's utterly vacuous. And there's no deeper analysis. So there's nobody asking who is being empowered by this. Where's the power? Where's the transfer of power? Who profits from it? And the reason I sort of chose the term zombie feminism was because it uses all the sort of the buzzwords of feminism of years gone by, but it's this sort of lumbering, hollowed out, brainless version that is sort of infecting everything it touches. So you end up, I'm afraid to say, with policies like your Green Party policy, whereby, it's an individual woman's choice if she goes into the sex industry or not, and couldn't possibly be anything to do with, wider social factors. And I think it's really corrosive and dangerous. It's like, you end up with your Bonnie Blues and your Lily Phillips, and you can't be judgmental and say, actually, that's really harmful. So yeah, I think that's what I was getting at about it. And I mean, something I found quite interesting actually, again, when I spoke to Mila, was that she thought she was a feminist when she thought she was sort of sticking it to the man, sticking it to the patriarchy, as did all of her friends, by dating, I just say dating, by selling sex to older men when they were like teenagers, like much older men when they were teenagers. And they were like, well, he's paying me for my time and he's paying me to go. And, it's such a sort of facile understanding, but that is now the mainstream understanding of prostitution, of pornography, and of cosmetic surgery as well, which obviously goes hand in hand. So, I think, Mila, she wanted to have a labiaplasty with the money that she was making from pornography and from prostitution, and I don't think that's particularly uncommon, because it's very much sort of the focus is on the individual. I don't know if that makes sense at all, or if I'm just
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's kind of girl power version of feminism, isn't it? It's nothing deeper than Spice Girls, and no real understanding of the history of feminism. You refer to the feminist aphorism in the book. Pornography is the theory, rape is the practice. Do you think pornography reflects men's behaviour, or do you think it shapes men's behaviour? Amongst other things, anyone in the audience who hasn't read Pornocracy, I think will be quite shocked with what you learned about child sexual abuse in particular.
And I mean, I want to get something very clear from the start, actually, which I probably should have said earlier, is just because I now firmly believe, and I was very skeptical of it to start with, that pornography is addictive. That doesn't mean I'm excusing men's behaviour. They still have a choice. There is, they can still not do it. But it is clear that it is impacting behaviour. And you can see that through everything. You can see that through sexual practices that were once niche, like strangulation. So that was something that, never happened to me when I was a young woman. It just wasn't a thing. And now I think it's 54% of Gen Z girls have experienced sexual strangulation. It is the norm to be strangled. That comes straight from pornography. There is no other place that comes from. That is from pornography. That's why it's become normal. Similarly, practices like anal sex, spitting, being slapped, these are all sort of things that are normalized by porn. And disturbingly, it also seems to be the case that when it comes to watching images of child sexual abuse, that is as well impacted by porn. So I mean, Gail Dines spoke about it in her 2010 book, which I've forgotten the name of. But anyway, porn culture, can't remember. Anyway, and she spoke about this sort of new class of paedophile that had been created, and she was talking to men in prison, and she discovered that actually quite a few of them had started on mainstream pornography, and then they had gravitated through pseudo child pornography to images of child sexual abuse. And they had no interest in that material before. It was just, again, part of this dopamine chasing, this sort of being pulled algorithmically along to darker and darker and more extreme content. Because of course, you know, if it's something that a partner can't satisfy apart from anything else, they're going to keep people online. It's going to keep men online. They know there's a financial motive to it as well. And we have seen an explosion. I mean, the prisons are already overcrowded, but I mean, 8 out of 10 men arrested for having images of child sexual abuse. And let's be honest, it's a tiny fraction of men who are arrested in the first place. 8 out of 10 walk out of court without a custodial sentence. And we're not routinely searching sex offenders' hard drives. I just don't think the system could cope if we were to do that, frankly, because it is so normal. I can't remember where I was going with this, but yeah, I think there is absolutely a conveyor belt towards the most extreme content, and also something I think that is kind of misunderstood. I'm not suggesting necessarily that it's a monkey see, monkey do type thing. It's more that if you see something reflected online, or if you see it, it becomes normal. It becomes it's a permission giving thing. So, noise. Oh, sorry, I heard a strange noise then. I don't know what it was. So yeah, it's like a permission giving. So if you see somebody else doing it, that becomes the norm, and then you end up with a group based around that norm. And I mean, you can see that, for example, in the group Coco, which was a website that Dominique Pellico used when he was sort of uploading pictures of his wife, his ex-wife now, thank God. And it's, you know, the norms that develop around these practices can be very dangerous, and yeah, so it's not even so much it's not a case of it. It's not a case of it shaping behavior. It's more sort of if you see it, you think it's acceptable. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So much of what you've said today is absolutely horrific in terms of the extent of pornography, how available it is, the harm it's doing, the power that pornography has over people and over society, and the effect it's had, the way it's changed in society. Do you think anything can be done to resist the harms of pornography? And how is there any way to turn the tide?
I mean, this is that was a bit of the book I found most difficult, was sort of acknowledging that actually we're quite far down the line, and it might be a couple of generations before we're out the other side, I think, if indeed we ever do get out the other side. So obviously Gail Dines, her suggestion is to treat it as a public health crisis, and I think there is something in that, because obviously it would give avenues for treatment, to which I think would be more likely to attract support than a more punitive way of dealing with it. But I think just the first thing we need to do is to recognise that it is not okay, that it is not acceptable, just to say no. And I sort of feel like, and I won't go into this too much, don't worry, but I sort of feel like we're slightly in a similar position now as we were with transgenderism, and when women started to try and draw attention to the threats to women's spaces and all the rest of it. And it was, it was a really difficult thing to push against, because it was just sort of dismissed. And similarly, if you push against porn, you're prudish, you don't understand, you're you're bigoted, you're backward. And it's I want people to have lots of happy consensual sex. It's not a prudish thing. It's a really serious social issue, and we're at risk. So I think it's very important to not use pornography yourself, to not give it any, a lot of the Burton review, which was brilliant in many ways, but she still spoke to pornographers, and she still, no, they're scum. Do not associate with them. Absolutely hard line, no. So I think we need to, be unashamed to take a hard line against it. Because I think actually we're sort of at risk of losing what it is to be human if we continue down this path.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for all the insights you've given us. Claire, you said you had a question. I don't know if you've got more than one question now that people would like to put to Jo.
There are a couple. The first one is, how do porn addicts rewire their brains to A, loosen the addiction, and B, learn to be stimulated through person-to-person physical contact?
A short answer is I don't really know, but I can have a, for want of a better word, have a bash at it. I don't know what. Sorry, it's in the brain. I can't help it now. So when you read porn recovery forums, the pattern is very similar to that of alcoholics, to that of drug addicts, in terms of the process of withdrawal, of the sort of almost a physical feeling of pain that people go through before they come off it. So I think we really need addiction to be recognised, and for clinics to help people come off it. I think there are sort of sex addicts anonymous groups, but again, there's no sort of top line. This isn't okay, and I think that's what we need.
Thank you, Natasha. I can see your hand. I wonder if maybe Claire just ask the other questions that she has in the chat first, and then we'll see if any observers would have a question, and we'll go to you first when we do that. So, Claire, did you have another question for Jo in the chat?
Yes. How do young women find the courage and words to decline sexual practices they do not want? Are they even aware that they can? Do lessons on consent for year 9 to 11 need to go much more deeply into what consent means?
Yeah, I mean, I've got to be honest, I'm very skeptical about consent lessons, full stop. I mean, it's nice in theory, but I think it's a sticking plaster over kind of a gaping wound. I don't think having a well-meaning sex educator say, this is what consent is, can do anything to balance out the harms that are done by seeing a woman smiling as she's getting choked to the point of unconsciousness and masturbating to that. That is going to be a far more powerful teacher than anything that is said to the contrary. I think probably the only thing we can do is teach kids to recognise one another, and teach boys in particular to recognise the humanity of girls. When it comes to sort of, just say no, I mean, it's really difficult. I mean, I'm sure all of us remember experiences, when you're, apart from anything else, when you're sort of insecure, you're naked in bed with someone who's stronger than you and who can rape you. It's very difficult to say, no, I don't want to do that. And not only that, it's now stigmatized because, you're considered unsexy if you refuse things because of the way sort of norms have progressed. So I think sort of putting the onus on young women to say no isn't particularly helpful. I think we need to teach boys to start recognising girls as human. I don't think we will do that until we get them off porn.
I do have another question. I don't think they've. Oh yeah, I would like the guest author to please clarify their stance on transgender rights regarding their comment on raising concerns on the threat to women's spaces.
Do you want me to answer that?
Yep, go for it.
All right, in which case, hello, person who has sent in a question. I believe that trans men are women, and I believe that trans women are men, and I don't think that you can separate the transgender movement from pornography. I think absolutely the idea that woman is a sexy costume that can be tried on is what convinces so many men to transition. And I think the fear of being sexualized is what convinces many young women to present as men.
I think that's very clear. Thank you, Jo. Claire, did you have any other questions in the chat? So you're on mute.
Sorry. No, there are no more, so we can go to open floor, I suppose.
Yeah, so if anybody observing has got a question for Jo, anything about book pornography, anything about the issues that have been raised. Natasha, what would you like to ask? Hi, Natasha, you're on mute.
Yeah, I'm just trying to unmute myself. Sorry about that.
That's okay. That's fine.
I was interested in how this all plays in with because it's quite a lot about these meta glasses at the moment, and I wondered if Josephine had something to say about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a. No, sorry, I was just going to say there was a really good article that somebody wrote. I can't remember the name of the journalist, about having to basically shame men out of using them. What are your views?
Yeah, I think actually shame, the power of shame is incredibly useful. I think, that serves as a social function, because, effectively as a society, we shame behaviors that are harmful. And I do think that technologies like meta glasses are harmful. Also, when it comes to, to return to the earlier point about single sex spaces, when you have a unisex space, it's far easier for men to put cameras in. And we are seeing that it is a wholesale breaking down of boundaries. And yeah, it's when whatever technology is developed, there is always a way it is used against women. So whether that was when I was growing up, I remember a lot of like heavy breathing phone calls, or whatever it happens to be, there will always be a way that it gets used to intimidate and harass women, particularly for men's sexual enjoyment. But yeah, I think if we could make it embarrassing and unacceptable, that would do a lot to stop it. Sort of, when it comes to new technologies like meta glasses. I mean, that's the tip of the iceberg. We've got so many of these things coming down the pipeline. I mean, there's also not only AI companions, but there's also haptic suits. There's sort of like actual sort of 3D porn now as a thing. There were so many things that are blurring reality from fantasy. And I think we do need a hard, clear line about what's public space and what's private space as well.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a bit
Natasha,
rambling.
no, it's interesting. And I mean, every issue just raises more and more issues, doesn't it? You end up going down a little bit of a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Zoe, what was your question?
So I was just going to say a bit about an experience that I had in my local Green Party WhatsApp chat. So the discussion started off as one about the issue on X, where there was AI porn and it was sort of AI child abuse. So people were commenting that wasn't acceptable, which obviously it isn't. And somebody made the comment, a man made the comment, oh, but I'm talking about the abusive porn, the non-consensual, the child stuff, not talking about other porn. So I said, oh, well, you do realise it is okay to say that no porn is, porn is just not okay. Because I thought perhaps he was thinking, well, this is the Green Party chat, I have to follow the party line and agree with the policy. So I thought, well, I'll give him the opening to say, well, perhaps, this isn't okay. Anyway, it kind of degenerated into quite bullying behavior. I was explaining that my view was that porn and sex work is exploitative, it's abusive, no exceptions. I was quoting Gail Dines, and several people in the group took great defence at this. I wasn't being open-minded. I was, all those things. And I explained that I'd looked at all the different sides. I've been to webinars looking at both sides with ex sort of sex workers and people who've been in the porn industry. And I said, I've come to my view, having looked at all the different evidence, heard all the different viewpoints. That still wasn't okay. And then I was told, sorry, this is a bit of a long story, but then I was told, oh, but there is feminist porn, there's porn made by women for women. Now, I haven't seen any of that. I don't know whether that was something you looked into, Jo, and whether you've got any comments on that, whether there is a difference, is the content different, is it okay? I don't know. I just thought it'd be interesting if you...
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to pretend that all pornography is as exploitative as, there are different forms, there are different degrees, but I think ultimately all of it is harmful because it's objectifying, because you end up, rather than having sex, rather than relating to someone, you're relating to a screen. I mean, that's just a fundamentally unhealthy thing to do. Also, as I say, we don't know why the women are doing it. They might say they consent, but you do not know their backstories. And for example, the website that Samantha Niblett, that bloody awful Labour MP, has been pushing, which is Make Love Not Porn. Supposedly it's all consensual, all the rest of it. But I mean, how would you stop an ex-partner from uploading an image? Or, how do you know it isn't revenge porn? How do you know it's consensual? How do you know that she's not being beaten when she's off screen? I mean, you do not know. And I think the chances are, from what we know about why people go into pornography, the chances are there will be some sort of exploitation going on. And when it, with regard to the size of the market, it is tiny. It is irrelevant. I mean, I cannot get across how, I mean, there are still, even though we've supposedly got all these new bloody laws that have come in to stop extreme porn, to stop strangulation porn, to stop incest being shown in porn, which is great. In theory, that's great. I am sick to death of reporting to Ofcom sites that are up there now, and they have got more niche types of, what's the one I looked up the other day, because I was writing an article on lactation. I was writing an article about male lactation and the breastfeeding fetish, and there were far more examples of male breastfeeding lactation fetish than there were of pickle porn. Oh, sorry, someone's gone. The screen's gone blank.
Oh. No, it's fine. I think somebody just unmuted themselves.
Okay, yeah. So frankly, it's such a tiny slice of the market. It drives me nuts.
And like you say, there's no way of knowing, or even assuming it's possible to have consensual pornography, there's no way of knowing whether the women you view are consenting or not. If there's anybody else who has a question, then please do raise your hand. If you're not sure how to do that, if you go to the bottom of your screen, there should be a reaction button. Jess.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Or am I going to have to turn my screen off again?
No, you're fine. Just for anyone who doesn't know, Jess often has problems with her technology and she can go a little bit echoey and pausing, but you're clear at the moment.
If I do, I'll switch off my my video. I think I think now I'm approaching 60 in September. When you have a child, I'm not saying you should have a child to change your worldview. I'm just saying it did. And since having a child, everything changes. Everything about what you invest in the world, what you want for the world. This is where I struggle with Green Party policy, because it seems anathema to me that we talk about resources, we talk about saving the planet and the climate and all this. And porn, obviously, the industry itself is a huge impact on the climate, just in sheer waste and use of technology. And now we're coming into AI. But I think as well, it's because when you've watched the world with open eyes and rather than closed eyes, you see the damage. And I haven't met anyone, I've not met one person in my entire life who hasn't been damaged after they've been involved in this industry. And I've not met one woman, not one woman who hasn't come across something in their life that has been very much tainted by pornography, sort of, what's the word, vicariously, or being forced to watch it. And I remember as a teenager, oh yeah, let's all watch some porn because it's like, it's like the real trendy thing to do. Now that was like, again, that was like some, little video off, Blockbuster somewhere. It was like nothing compared to what there is now. But I fast forward, sorry, I'm burbling a bit, but it was just because you've really sort of set off a lot of things that I hadn't thought about that I'm very upset about. There was this young girl at school when I was working as a teaching assistant and a counsellor, and this was in the noughties, and she came to me, she said, Miss, I've got, a problem down there. And I said, oh, that's okay, love. We'll get you to the nurse and we'll do all of this. And I said, we'll get you some pads and things like that. And then she said, oh, me and my boyfriend have been having sex. And I was like, oh, she was only 12. And I said to her, well, okay, so let's just deal with one thing at a time. I said, are you using protection? Because I assumed that she was having a period. She said, oh, yeah, that's all right, miss, we do anal. So she was 12 years old, and what she was suffering from that day was a prolapse. And apparently within pornography, that is the desirable look to a woman's anus, is to have what's called a rosebud. And of course, I didn't know anything about this. I was literally educated on the spot, almost by a 12-year-old. So, of course, that immediately had to involve the police. Are you, or through the work that you did, seeing more and more and more of that? Because that was rare. That was so rare in the noughties.
Yeah, so rosebudding is a particular type of porn. And yeah, I did some, I sort of referenced in the book sort of the number of views that, I mean, this is what made, to go back to your earlier question about sort of, ethical porn. This is what just drives me mad. It's just like that there are far more people clicking on rosebudding porn than there are, empowered female whatever porn. Is ridiculous. Yeah, it's so I've spoken, mostly it's anecdotal because there's no one collecting the stuff and there's no money to do the research into it because nobody bloody cares. But I've spoken anecdotally to GPs who have said that they're having problems with this. Obviously, strangulation. We know that it can lead to, I think it's death within 17 seconds of being strangled if you hit the right bit. So yeah, there are serious health problems that women are suffering and girls are suffering as a result of this. And yeah, it does seem to be getting worse, but nobody's tracking it. So all I have are anecdotes. I'm both afraid and disappointed to say. Yeah.
And I think with strangulation, even if there's not that immediate effect, am I right in saying that women and girls are at greater risk of strokes? I think I remember reading somewhere.
It's the second leading cause of strokes amongst women under 40. And, I mean, they're fairly rare anyway to have strokes under 40, but it also leads to memory loss. There are lots of incontinence, obviously. There are lots of impacts further down the line from being strangled during sex. And yeah, it's, I think there's college surveys in Canada, US, and Australia. It's all generally of women under 30, so that's not just Gen Z, it's around about a third are experiencing that.
Okay, thank you. Sue Taylor, you've been waiting really patiently with your hand up there. What would you like to ask?
There's a couple of things. One is a personal one. I've got a grandson who's 34. He's built like a brick, whatever, 6'4", right, big tough guy, tattoos. And he's now a father, and he didn't want to have a daughter because he didn't feel he could keep her safe. Now, I know he's watched porn, he's a regular guy, let's say. And I just think I didn't know what to say to him. I really didn't. And just when, my great granddaughter was born, I said, just remember she's a human being, and love her. And you know how to keep her safe, and review your life and learn from that. That's going on. But the other thing was Josephine mentioned about 90% of sex workers were sexually abused or were witnesses of them. I worked for an independent charity in the latter half of the 1990s, and we got commissioned by the Home Office. We got a lot of commissions from the Home Office to do work that they didn't want to face to. And one of them was to do a profile of all the street prostitutes in a prominent city in England. And I interviewed numerous women. I would say apart from two, I'd be proud to have them all as my daughter. But the figures, I think, probably haven't changed. It was, from what I remember from the report, 89% had been victims or had witnessed sexual abuse as children. 92% had witnessed general violence. The level of corruption within the criminal justice service was dreadful. And the police, and I'm hoping something, this is ancient news now, but the women had nowhere really to go. There were certain religious organisations and things like that, but no one with any real power was there to support them. And the local Tory MP actually withdrew what support work there was, and they weren't allowed, the sex support workers weren't allowed to give the women condoms and things like this. It was just crazy. And I later learned, and Josephine will know more about this than me, that was part of a nation, well, England, I think, I'm not sure about Wales, Scotland, and Ireland, but that was a nation report. And part of it was to see whether the women were interested in tolerance zones, which they weren't. They wanted safe brothels, It broke my heart. It's out of all, I've worked with communities before riots, during riots, post riots. We were there at the coalface, let's say. But that's the one job that I'll never forget and that impacted me. And it breaks my heart because these women, whether they had boyfriends or not, were trying to do the best they could. And one of the questions I asked, what would you like? What would you like to be different? And they wanted tender loving care and an education. Because of their lifestyle, they couldn't go to evening classes, they couldn't go to college. How could they walk into a classroom if they'd been beaten up the night before? And I don't know what happened to that report and the many other reports that formed that research, but I'd be interested to see what Josephine knows about that. I think it was probably 1998, Josephine. I'm not sure. That's all I really wanted to say.
Thank you for sharing that, Sue. That was really moving.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for what incredible work. No, I don't know about that particular report, but I have read similar reports, and I do think that were we to bring in the Nordic model, I know you said that they wanted sort of safe brothels to work in. I actually probably not sure that's the best idea. I think that sort of giving exit strategies, as you suggest, with sort of education and support, will probably make more of a meaningful change, whilst also criminalising the bastards who are prepared to pay for sex that they know isn't wanted.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I totally agree with what you say.
It's almost 8 o'clock, so I think we're going to need to wrap up now. Jo, thank you very, very much for speaking with us tonight. Thank you everybody who came, especially we know it was we were competing with the eclipse, which was like once in a generation event. For anyone who missed the very beginning, we have recorded this webinar. It's going to go up on our YouTube channel. It's going to be on our website, and we will put a link in the next newsletter as well. So thank you very much again, and enjoy the rest of your evenings.